The family of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is called the Hashimi family after his grandfather Hashim bin Abdullah. Let us now speak a little about Hashim and his descendants. Hashim is the one responsible for giving food and water to the pilgrims. He was the first to offer the pilgrims sopped bread in broth. His first name was Ammar, but he was called Hashim because he had been in the practice of crumbling bread for the pilgrims. He was also the first man who started Quraysh's 2 journeys of summer and winter. It was reported that he went to Syria as a merchant. In Medina, he married Salma, the daughter of Ammar from the tribe Bani Adi bin An-Najjar. He spent some time with her in Medina, then he left for Syria again while she was pregnant. He died in Gaza in Palestine. Later, his wife gave birth to Abdul Muttalib and named him Shaiba for the white hair on his head and brought him up in her father's house in Medina. None of his family in Makkah learned of his birth. Hashim had 4 sons, Asad, Abu Saifi, Nadia, and Abdul Muttalib, and 5 daughters. Abdul Muttalib, after the death of Hashim, the charge of pilgrims' food and water went to his brother Al-Muttalib bin Abd Munaf, who was honest, generous, and trustworthy. When Abdul Muttalib reached the age of boyhood, his uncle Al-Muttalib heard of him and went to Medina to fetch him. When he saw him, tears filled his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He embraced him and took him on his camel. The boy, however, abstained from going with him to Makkah until he took his mother's consent. Al-Muttalib asked her to send the boy with him to Makkah, but she refused. He managed to convince her, saying, "Your son is going to Makkah to restore his father's authority and to live in the vicinity of the sacred house." There in Makkah, people wondered at seeing Abdul Muttalib, and they considered him the slave of Muttalib. Al-Muttalib said, "He is my nephew, the son of my brother Hashim." The boy was brought up in Al-Muttalib's house, but later on, Al-Muttalib died in Hardman in Yemen. So Abdul Muttalib took over and managed to maintain his people's prestige and outdo his grandfathers in his honorable behavior, which gained him Makkah's deep love and high esteem. When Al-Muttalib died, Nawfal usurped Abdul Muttalib of his charges. He asked for help from Quraysh, but they abstained from extending any sort of support to either of them. Consequently, Muttalib wrote to his uncles of Bani An-Najjar, his mother's brothers, to come to his aid. His uncle, Abu Sa'd bin Adi, his mother's brother, marched to Makkah with 80 horsemen with him and camped in Makkah. Abdul Muttalib received the men and Abu Sa'd. Abu Sa'd went to meet Nawfal. He found Nawfal sitting with some old men of Quraysh in the shade of Al-Kabah. Abu Sa'd drew his sword and said, "I swear by Allah that if you don't restore to my nephew what you have taken, I will kill you with this sword." Nawfal was thus forced to give up what he had usurped, and the notables of Quraysh were made to witness his words. Abu Sa'd then went to Abdul Muttalib's house, where he stayed for 3 nights, made Umrah, and left back for Medina. Later on, Nawfal entered into an alliance with Bani Abd Shams bin Abd Munaf against Bani Hashim. When Khuza'a, a tribe, saw Bani An-Najjar's support for Abdul Muttalib, they said, "He is our son as he is yours. We have more reasons to support him than you." Abd Munaf's mother was one of them. They went into a Nadwa house and entered into an alliance with Bani Hashim against Bani Abd Shams and Nawfal. It was an alliance that was later to constitute the main reason for the conquest of Makkah. Abdul Muttalib witnessed 2 important events in his lifetime, namely digging Zamzam well and the elephant raid on Al-Kabah. In brief, Abdul Muttalib received an order in his dream to dig Zamzam well in a particular place. He did that and found the things that Jurhum men had buried therein when they were forced to evacuate Makkah. He found the swords, armors, and the 2 deer of gold. The gate of Al-Kabah was stamped from the gold swords and the 2 deer, and then the tradition of providing Zamzam water to pilgrims was established. When the well of Zamzam gushed water forth, Quraysh made a claim to partnership in the enterprise, but Abdul Muttalib refused their demands on grounds that Allah had singled only him out for this honorable job. To settle the dispute, they agreed to consult Bani Sa'd's diviner. On their way, Allah showed them his signs that confirmed Abdul Muttalib's prerogative as regards the sacred spring. Only then did Abdul Muttalib make a solemn vow to sacrifice one of his adult children to Al-Kabah if he had 10. The second event was that of Abraha as-Sabah al-Habashi, the Abyssinian Ethiopian viceroy in Yemen. He had seen that the Arabs made their pilgrimage to Al-Kabah, so he built a large church in Sana'a in order to attract the Arab pilgrims to it to the exclusion of Makkah. A man from Kinana tribe understood this move. Therefore, he entered the church stealthily at night and besmeared its front wall with excrement. When Abraha knew of that, he got very angry and led a great army of 60,000 warriors to demolish Al-Kabah. He chose the biggest elephant for himself. His army included 9 or 13 elephants. He continued marching until he reached a place called Al-Magmaz. There, he mobilized his army, prepared his elephants, and got ready to enter Makkah. When he reached Muhassar Valley, between Muzdalifah and Mina, the elephant knelt down and refused to go forward. Whenever they directed it northwards, southwards, or eastwards, the elephant moved quickly, but when directed westwards towards Al-Kabah, it knelt down. Meanwhile, Allah loosed upon them birds in flights, hurling against them stones of baked clay, and made them like green blades devoured. These birds were very much like swallows and sparrows, each carrying 3 stones, 1 in its beak and 2 in its claws. The stones hit Abraha's men and cut their limbs and killed them. A large number of Abraha's soldiers were killed in this way, and the others fled at random and died everywhere. Abraha himself had an infection that had his fingertips amputated. When he reached Sana'a, he was in a miserable state and died soon after. The Quraishites on their part had fled for their lives to the hillocks and mountain tops. When the enemy had been thus routed, they returned home safely. The event of the elephant took place in the month of Al-Muharram, 50 or 55 days before the birth of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which corresponded to late February or early March 571 AD. It was a gift from Allah to his Prophet and his family. It could actually be regarded as a divine auspicious precursor of the light to come and accompany the advent of the Prophet and his family. By contrast, Jerusalem had suffered under the yoke of the atrocities of Allah's enemies. Here we can recall Bukhtanasar in BC 587 and the Romans in 70 AD. Al-Kabah, by divine grace, never came under the hold of the Christians, the Muslims of that time, although Makkah was populated by polytheists. News of the elephant event reached the most distant corners of the then civilized world. Abyssinia, Ethiopia, maintained strong ties with the Romans, while the Persians, on the other hand, were on the vigil with respect to any strategic changes that were looming on the socio-political horizon, and soon came to occupy Yemen. Incidentally, the Roman and Persian empires stood for the powerful civilized world at that time. The elephant raid event riveted the world's attention to the sacredness of Allah's house and showed that this house had been chosen by Allah for its holiness. It followed then, if any of its people claimed prophethood, it would be congruous with the outcome of the elephant event and would provide a justifiable explanation for the ulterior divine wisdom that lay behind backing polytheists against Christians in a manner that transcended the cause and effect formula. Abdul Muttalib had 10 sons: Al-Harith, Az-Zubair, Abu Talib, Abdullah, Hamza, Abu Lahab, Ghidaq, Maqwam, Safar, and Al-Abbas. He also had 6 daughters. Abdullah, the father of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His mother was Fatima, daughter of Amr bin Aid bin Al-Murran bin Makhzum bin Yaqda bin Murra. Abdullah was the smartest of Abdul Muttalib's sons, the chastest and the most loved. He was also the son whom the divination arrows pointed at to be slaughtered as a sacrifice to Al-Kabah. When Abdul Muttalib had 10 sons and they reached maturity, he divulged to them his secret vow in which they silently and obediently acquiesced. Their names were written on divination arrows and given to the guardian of their most beloved goddess, Hubal. The arrows were shuffled and drawn. An arrow showed that it was Abdullah to be sacrificed. Abdul Muttalib then took the boy to Al-Kabah with a razor to slaughter the boy. Quraysh, his uncles from the Makhzum tribe, and his brother Abu Talib, however, tried to dissuade him from consummating his purpose. He then sought their advice as regards his vow. They suggested that he summon a she-diviner to judge whereabout. She ordered that the divination arrows should be drawn with respect to Abdullah as well as 10 camels. She added that drawing the lots should be repeated with 10 more camels every time the arrow showed Abdullah. The operation was thus repeated until the number of the camels amounted to 100. At this point, the arrow showed the camels. Consequently, they were all slaughtered to the satisfaction of Hubal instead of his son. The slaughtered camels were left for anyone to eat from, human or animal. This incident produced a change in the amount of blood money usually accepted in Arabia. It had been 10 camels, but after this event, it was increased to 100. Islam later on approved of this. Another thing closely relevant to the above issue goes to the effect that the Prophet, peace be upon him, once said, "I am the offspring of the two slaughtered," meaning Ishmael and Abdullah. Abdul Muttalib chose Amina, daughter of Wahab bin Abd Munaf bin Zahra bin Kilab, as a wife for his son, Abdullah. She thus, in the light of this ancestral lineage, stood eminent in respect of nobility of position and descent. Her father was the chief of Bani Zahra, to whom great honor was attributed. They were married in Makkah, and soon after Abdullah was sent by his father to buy dates in Medina, where he died. In another version, Abdullah went to Syria on a trade journey and died in Medina on his way back. He was buried in the house of An-Nabigha al-Judi. He was 25 years old when he died. Most historians state that his death was 2 months before the birth of Mohamad, peace be upon him. Some others said that his death was 2 months after the Prophet's birth. When Amina was informed of her husband's death, she celebrated his memory in a most heart-touching elegy. Abdullah left very little wealth, 5 camels, a small number of goats, and a she-servant called Barakah, Ayman, who would later serve as the Prophet's nursemaid.